When Julissa Vey raised her sister's children, she thought her sacrifice would earn her peace, but instead, it unleashed a ruthless war of betrayal, obsession, and revenge, where every ally turned enemy, and the only way to survive was to expose the truth before it destroyed her. Julissa Vey had never planned on being a mother, at least not so soon. At 24, she imagined her future sketched out in neat lines: a career in architecture, the steady climb of independence, the dream of sketching skylines and turning them into steel and glass. But life has a cruel way of redrawing plans with hands you cannot fight. The call came on a storm-thick night. Her sister, Elena, had died in childbirth. No warning. No slow decline. One day, she was laughing with Julissa about baby names, and the next, she was gone, leaving behind not one child, but 3. Julissa stood at the edge of the hospital bed that night, staring at Elena's still body, trying to reconcile the silence with the memory of her laughter. She remembered her sister's last words to her, whispered only days before: "Promise me, if anything ever happens, you'll take care of them." Julissa had nodded then, thinking it was only a sister's nervous talk before labor. But promises made in jest can still shackle the soul in iron. And so, within 24 hours, Julissa was no longer just Julissa. She was mother, guardian, protector, and, though she didn't know it yet, sacrificial lamb to a life of unrelenting duty. The first few years blurred together. Bottles lined up like soldiers on the kitchen counter. Endless diapers, midnight cries, scraped knees, the smell of formula curdling in her clothes. The walls of her small apartment closed in with every toy that multiplied like weeds, every textbook she abandoned, every friend who stopped calling. Her own life became a series of what-ifs. What if she had said no? What if someone else in the family had stepped up? What if she had chosen herself? But every time the children clung to her legs or whispered "Mama" by mistake, the guilt anchored her. She was their entire world, and that world, though fragile, had to be held together by her hands alone. By the time Julissa turned 30, the children had grown into restless storms of their own. Adriana, the eldest, carried herself with the sharp defiance of a girl who believed the world owed her more than it had given. Micah, the middle child, wore his silence like armor, hiding resentments no one could read. And little Sienna, though still soft in her teenage years, was already beginning to test boundaries like a flame licking at paper. Julissa often found herself staring at them, torn between pride and exhaustion. She had given them everything: her youth, her health, her chances at love. She had turned down promotions, skipped vacations, and let her dreams wither on the vine. And yet, more often than not, their eyes didn't look at her with gratitude, but with accusation. One night, after yet another argument about curfews and responsibilities, Adriana spat words that pierced deeper than any knife. "You're not even our real mother. Stop pretending like you own us. You ruined your own life. Don't blame us for it." The words hung in the air like poison. Julissa staggered under them, her hand clutching the counter as if the ground itself had shifted. Not their real mother. It was true, and yet it was a truth that shredded her. That night, long after the children had slammed doors and retreated into their rooms, Julissa sat alone at the kitchen table. The ticking clock became a cruel metronome, marking the seconds of her wasted life. She stared at her reflection in the dark window, a woman with tired eyes, lines carving deep into her face far too early, hair pulled back in a bun that had once been effortless, but now sagged with fatigue. She no longer recognized the girl who once dreamed of drafting buildings that would kiss the clouds. Instead, she had built invisible walls, around herself, around her dreams, around her heart. She whispered into the emptiness, her voice cracking like brittle glass. "Was it worth it, Elena? Was it worth leaving me with all of this?" But no answer came. Only the echo of silence, and the faint sound of Sienna crying in the next room. It was in that moment, amidst the sobs of a child who would never understand the depth of her sacrifice, that something inside Julissa shifted. She felt the first tremor of anger. Not at the children, They were innocent in their selfishness. Not even Adelina, though her promise haunted like a ghost. No. The anger turned inward, toward herself, for allowing her life to be consumed, for surrendering her dreams without a fight, for believing that sacrifice was the same as love. Julissa pressed her palms flat against the table, her jaw tightening. A thought she had buried for years rose like a serpent in her chest. What if I walked away? The idea terrified her. But it also sparked something else, something dangerous. For the first time in years, Julissa realized she wanted something for herself. She wanted freedom. She wanted to remember what it felt like to be alive, not just surviving. And that desire, the seed of rebellion, was where the cracks in her world began to form. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance, as if the heavens themselves knew change was coming. Julissa didn't yet know how deep the fracture would run. She didn't yet see the betrayals, the secrets, and the dangerous temptations waiting just beyond the fragile walls she had built. But the first domino had fallen. And once a domino falls, nothing can stop the chain. The morning after Adriana's venomous words, Julissa woke to a silence that was too heavy to be peaceful. The apartment felt like a battlefield, the walls holding the echo of last night's war. She moved through the kitchen mechanically, pouring coffee she barely tasted, staring at the empty chairs that were once filled with laughter, fights, and the chaos of children who now saw her more as a jailer than a guardian. As she lifted her mug, her phone buzzed with a notification. A name appeared, one she hadn't seen in years. Caleb Rowan. Julissa froze. The name alone stirred an ache she thought long dead. Caleb, the boy she once loved in college, the one who had asked her to move with him to New York when he landed his first job at an architectural firm. She had wanted to say yes.
God, she had wanted to.
But that was the same year Elena died, and her promise had shackled her to a different life. Caleb's message was short, casual, almost careless. Hey, Jules. Saw your name pop up on a professional thread. Hard to believe it's been this long. Coffee sometime? Her thumb hovered over the screen, her pulse thrumming.
Coffee.
2 syllables that felt like a trap and a lifeline all at once. She closed the phone quickly, her heart pounding. That day at work, a local drafting firm where she did the tedious tasks no one else wanted, Julissa found her mind drifting. She was supposed to be correcting layouts, but her pencil traced lines that spiraled into towers, bridges, and cities she once dreamed of designing. The sketches came alive under her hand, raw and desperate, like ghosts demanding to be remembered. Vey, her supervisor barked, snapping her back. You're behind again. She muttered an apology, but inside, something burned hotter. Why was she still here, buried under mediocrity, when she had once been destined for more? The thought wouldn't leave her, even as she trudged home that night, grocery bags digging into her palms, the weight of duty pressing down like shackles. At home, another battle brewed. Micah had skipped class again, his silence thick and hostile when Julissa confronted him. Adriana barely acknowledged her, eyes glued to her phone, smirking at some unseen conversation. Only Sienna lingered in the kitchen, hesitant, sensing the tension. Jules, Sienna whispered, using the nickname no one else dared. Are you okay? Julissa smiled weakly, brushing her sister's child's hair from her face. I'm fine, sweetheart. Just tired. But Sienna's eyes, wide and searching, made Julissa's chest ache. The girl was still young enough to need her, still innocent enough to believe in her. That innocence, Julissa realized, was the last thread binding her fully to this life. And yet, even as she tucked Sienna into bed, her phone lay heavy in her pocket, Caleb's message burning like a secret flame. The storm broke 2 nights later. Adriana came home past midnight, reeking of perfume and rebellion. When Julissa demanded to know where she had been, Adriana laughed, tossing her purse on the counter. Why do you care? You're not Mom. Stop pretending you are. The words shattered what little composure Julissa had left. For the first time, she screamed, her voice raw, feral, carrying years of buried anger. Do you think I wanted this life? Do you think I chose to give up everything for you? Ungrateful children? I lost everything. Everything for you. Adriana flinched, but her reply came sharp, cruel. Then maybe you should have left us at the hospital. No one asked you to play the martyr. Micah appeared in the hallway, his face unreadable, while Sienna clutched the banister with tears streaming down her cheeks. The house cracked under the weight of that moment. The silence after was suffocating. Adriana stormed upstairs, Micah retreated without a word, and Sienna's sobs filled the air like broken glass. Julissa collapsed into a chair, shaking, her throat raw, her heart pounding. The children she had sacrificed her life for despised her. The life she lived was not hers. And for the first time, she admitted to herself, she didn't want it anymore. Later that night, while the apartment lay in uneasy silence, Julissa sat in the dark with her phone. Her thumb hovered again over Caleb's message. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from anticipation. And this time she replied, "Coffee sounds nice.
When?
What Julissa didn't know was that this one decision, this small act of rebellion, would ignite a chain of events she could never control. Secrets would unravel, loyalties would shatter, and her heart, long starved of love, would find itself caught between desire and destruction. In the shadows of her ordinary life, the storm had begun to gather. And Julissa, for the first time in years, stepped willingly into the rain. The cafe was tucked away on a quiet corner, the kind of place Julissa would have once loved to spend hours sketching in. The walls were lined with old photographs, the air rich with the scent of roasted beans and something sweet in the oven. Yet as she stepped inside, her chest tightened, her palms damp. Caleb Rowan was already there. Time had sharpened him, carved angles into the boy she remembered. He stood when he saw her, and for a moment, Julissa forgot how to breathe. His smile was softer than she expected, touched with the same warmth she had fallen for years ago. But his eyes, those eyes, still carried that spark, the one that once made her believe anything was possible. "Jules," he said, his voice low, familiar, dangerous. "You look different. But still you." She laughed nervously, brushing at her hair. Different is a polite way of saying exhausted. Caleb's gaze lingered on her a beat too long.
No.
"It's not that." They sat, and for a moment, the years between them melted. Their conversation slid easily from old college memories to cautious questions about the present. Julissa found herself laughing, really laughing for the first time in months. But beneath it all, there was an undercurrent, a tension like a taut string ready to snap. Every glance held unspoken things, every pause hinted at what could have been, what might still be. When Caleb asked about her life, Julissa hesitated. How could she explain years of sacrifice, of dreams buried under duty? She tried to keep it simple, raising her sister's children, working at the firm, surviving. Caleb frowned, his brow furrowing. "That's a lot, Jules. You always wanted more. I remember you, sketching until sunrise, talking about skylines and bridges. What happened?" The question sliced her open. For a moment, she almost told him everything, that she felt trapped, that she was drowning in resentment, that she sometimes dreamed of vanishing into the night and never returning. But the words caught in her throat. Instead, she forced a smile. Life happened. But Caleb didn't buy it. His hand brushed hers across the table, a fleeting contact that sent a shiver racing through her. Life doesn't get to take everything. Not if you don't let it. Later, when they stepped outside, the city air was cool and damp, carrying the scent of rain. They lingered under the awning, neither willing to end the moment. Caleb looked at her, something unreadable flickering in his eyes. "You deserve to live, Julissa," he said softly. "Not just survive. Don't forget that." Her throat tightened. The words sank into her bones, dangerous in their truth. She wanted to believe him, wanted to feel alive again. But as she turned to leave, a figure across the street caught her eye, someone standing too still, watching. A man in a dark coat, his face hidden beneath the shadow of an umbrella. When she blinked, he was gone. Julissa shook her head, trying to dismiss the unease curling in her stomach. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was her imagination, fueled by exhaustion and the strangeness of seeing Caleb again. And yet, as she walked home, every shadow seemed to stretch too long, every footstep behind her echoed too sharply. At home, Adriana was waiting. "You were out?" the girl asked, arms crossed, suspicion dripping from her tone. Julissa bristled.
Yes.
"I'm allowed to leave the house once in a while." Adriana's smirk was cruel. "What? Got yourself a boyfriend now? About time. Maybe he'll put up with your nagging instead of us." Julissa's hand trembled as she set her keys down. The sharp retort on her lips died when she saw Sienna sitting at the table, wide-eyed, watching them both. Micah wasn't there. He hadn't been home in 2 days. The walls closed in again, but this time, Julissa felt something else stirring in her chest. Not just anger, but defiance. She had tasted something outside this life tonight. Freedom. Desire. A flicker of who she used to be. And she wasn't ready to let it go. But upstairs, as she lay awake, Julissa couldn't shake the feeling of that figure in the rain. The way he had stood, watching, waiting. She told herself it was nothing. Yet deep down, she knew. Nothing in her life had ever been simple. And this was only the beginning. The storm returned 3 nights later. Not in the skies, but inside Julissa's apartment. Micah stumbled in past midnight, reeking of smoke and alcohol, his eyes glazed. Julissa had been pacing for hours, her nerves already frayed from Adriana's defiance and Sienna's worried silence. The moment the door slammed shut, she lost control. "Where have you been?" she demanded, her voice sharper than she intended. Micah shrugged, his smirk insolent. "Out." "Out where?" "You're 16, Micah. You can't just disappear for days without telling anyone." His laughter was cruel, mocking. "Why not? You're not my mother." The words landed like daggers. Julissa's hands trembled, fury and heartbreak crashing together in her chest. "I may not be your mother, but I've sacrificed everything for you. Don't you dare." "Sacrificed." Micah cut her off, his voice rising, venom spilling. "That's your excuse for everything, isn't it? You think we owe you something because you gave up your dreams? You didn't do it for us, Julissa. You did it because you had no choice. Don't act like a saint." Adriana appeared at the top of the stairs, arms crossed, eyes glinting with satisfaction.
He's right.
"We never asked you to play martyr. Maybe if you actually had a life, you wouldn't be so miserable." Sienna's small voice broke through the shouting. "Stop it. Please, just stop." But no one listened. The house quaked under the weight of their words, every syllable tearing deeper into Julissa's already fractured heart. She saw her sister's children standing before her not as the babies she once cradled, but as strangers sharpened by resentment, strangers who saw her as the enemy. And for the first time, Julissa wondered if they were right. Later, after the house had fallen into uneasy silence, Julissa sat in the kitchen, her hands wrapped tightly around a cold mug of tea she hadn't touched. Her phone lay on the table, Caleb's number glowing in the call log. She hadn't told him about tonight's eruption, hadn't told him how deep the cracks ran in her home. But his voice lingered in her head. "You deserve to live, Julissa. Not just survive." She whispered into the darkness, her voice breaking. "Do I? Do I really?" Her reflection in the window stared back, hollow-eyed, haunted. That was when she saw it again. A shadow. Across the street. The same man in the dark coat, standing too still, his gaze locked on her window. Julissa's breath caught. She stumbled to her feet, heart pounding, fumbling for the curtains. By the time she yanked them shut, the figure was gone. Her chest heaved, her pulse racing. She wanted to believe it was paranoia, a trick of exhaustion, but something inside her whispered otherwise. Someone was watching her. The next day at work, Julissa couldn't focus. Her sketches blurred, her supervisor's voice droned, her mind circling back to that figure in the night. When Caleb called, inviting her to dinner, she nearly said no. Nearly. But the thought of warmth, of escape, of being seen for more than her failures. She couldn't resist. That evening, as she stood before her mirror, smoothing the dress she hadn't worn in years, guilt gnawed at her. Sienna had begged her not to go, fear flickering in the girl's eyes. "What if something happens while you're gone?" she'd asked. Julissa had kissed her forehead, whispering, "Nothing will happen. I promise." But even as she said it, she didn't believe it. Dinner with Caleb was everything she'd longed for: laughter, warmth, the spark of something dangerous and thrilling. His eyes lingered on her with a hunger that made her feel alive, desired, like the woman she had once dreamed of being. Yet beneath the glow of candlelight, Julissa couldn't shake the sense of being followed. Every time the door opened, every flicker of shadow across the glass, her stomach tightened. At one point, Caleb leaned close, his voice low. "Jules, what's wrong?" She hesitated, then shook her head. "Nothing. Just tired." But the truth pressed against her ribs, suffocating. Someone was watching. She could feel it. When she returned home, the apartment was silent. Too silent. She climbed the stairs slowly, dread coiling tighter with each step. Adriana's door was shut. Micah's room is empty. Only Sienna's light spilled faintly into the hall. Julissa pushed the door open and froze. The window was wide open. Curtains fluttered in the night air. And on Sienna's desk, a single slip of paper lay beneath the lamplight. Julissa picked it up with trembling hands. Scrawled across it, in sharp, deliberate letters, were 4 words. "You can't protect them." Her blood ran cold. She staggered back, the note slipping from her fingers, her heart hammering so hard she could barely breathe. Someone had been here, inside her home. The shadows weren't in her head. The danger was real. And Julissa Vey's world was no longer just fractured. It was under attack. The night after the courtroom battle ended, Julissa sat alone in her apartment, staring at the half-empty glass of wine on the table. The city lights blinked outside, but they felt distant, like a world she no longer belonged to. The children's laughter from the next room drifted through the cracked door, warm and innocent, yet Julissa felt the weight of exhaustion sink into her bones. Winning custody should have been a relief, a victory, but instead, it felt like she had opened a door into a battlefield that stretched farther than she could see. She could still hear Diane's venomous words from the courtroom. "You'll never be enough for them. You're nothing but a shadow of your sister." Julissa clenched her fists, nails digging into her palm until her skin stung. The words lingered like poison. A knock broke the silence. Sharp, deliberate. She froze, eyes darting toward the door. It was nearly midnight. Who would come now? She rose cautiously, her heart thudding. When she opened the door, she found Adrian Kane standing there. His tailored suit was rumpled, his tie loosened, his dark hair slightly disheveled as though he had been wrestling with thoughts all evening. His eyes, however, were sharp, unwavering, locked on her with a mixture of concern and something else she couldn't quite place. "May I come in?" he asked, his voice low, controlled. Julissa hesitated. Adrian Kane, the lawyer who had carried her case like it was his own crusade, was the last person she expected at her door this late. And yet, she stepped aside, letting him in. He walked in with a kind of restrained urgency, setting his briefcase on the table but never sitting. Instead, he turned to her with an intensity that made the air in the room feel charged. "There's something you need to know," he said finally. Julissa's stomach nodded. "What is it?" Adrian drew in a long breath. "The case may be over, but it's not finished. Diane is planning something else. Something dangerous." Her pulse spiked. "Dangerous? What do you mean?" Adrian glanced toward the kids' room as if to check they weren't listening. Then he lowered his voice. "She's already contacted people with power influence. She's preparing to drag you through another trial, not in court, but in public. She wants to ruin your reputation, Julissa. And if she succeeds, she won't just take the kids, she'll destroy everything you've built." The words slammed into Julissa like a storm. She staggered slightly, steadying herself on the table. "But why?" Her voice trembled. "Why is she doing this?" What kind of sister does this? Adrian's gaze softened for a fleeting moment. Because to her, you're not a sister. You're competition. And people like Diane don't forgive competition, they annihilate it. The silence that followed was heavy. Julissa felt her throat tighten. You need to be careful, Adrian continued. I've already intercepted a few things. Whispers. False rumors she's planting. But it won't stop there. She's relentless. And he hesitated, his eyes darkening. There's someone else backing her. Julissa's breath caught.
Who?
Adrian shook his head. Not yet. I don't have proof. But trust me, she isn't acting alone. The room seemed to close in around Julissa. The air thickened with dread. She thought of the children, their small hands clutching hers, their fragile trust in her. The idea of Diane tearing that away made her chest ache with fury and fear. And then, beneath the fear, something else stirred. Resolve. She straightened, her voice steady now. If she wants war, then she'll get one. But I won't let her destroy me. Or them. Adrian's lips curved into the faintest of smiles, not of amusement, but of recognition. That's what I needed to hear. Because this is only the beginning. For a moment, the room was silent again, except for the ticking of the clock and the faint hum of the city outside. But between them, a current ran, dangerous, unspoken, alive. Julissa's eyes met Adrian's. She saw something in them she hadn't noticed before, something beyond duty or strategy. And for the first time in weeks, her chest fluttered with something other than fear. It terrified her. But it also gave her hope. The war was coming, yes. But maybe, just maybe, she wouldn't have to face it alone. The following morning, Julissa woke with a jolt, her heart pounding. For a brief second, she thought it had all been a nightmare, the custody battle, Diane's venom, Adrian's late-night warning. But when she opened her eyes and saw the faint glow of dawn slipping through the curtains, reality settled like a weight on her chest. The apartment was unusually quiet. Too quiet. She padded into the living room, barefoot, her silk robe trailing behind her. On the coffee table lay the remnants of last night, Adrian's untouched coffee cup, his files, the faint scent of his cologne lingering in the air. He had left before dawn, slipping away silently, leaving only his words to echo in her mind. She's not done. She's coming for you. Julissa poured herself coffee, her hands trembling. She had barely taken a sip when her phone buzzed. A new message. Her stomach knotted as she glanced at the screen. It wasn't from Adrian. It was from an unknown number. You think you've won. You haven't. Tick-tock, Julissa. The mug slipped from her hands, shattering against the tiles. Hot coffee splattered across her feet, but she barely felt it. Her breath hitched. She read the words again, her pulse racing.
Diane.
It had to be. Her hands shook as she called Adrian. He answered on the second ring. I got a message, she whispered, her voice barely steady. From her. Read it to me. She did, and silence followed. Then Adrian's voice dropped to a calm, controlled tone, the kind he used when danger was close. Save the message. Don't delete it. This isn't just intimidation, it's evidence. She's crossing into harassment. Julissa swallowed hard. Adrian, what if she comes here? What if she won't touch you. Not while I'm here. His voice carried an intensity that both reassured and unsettled her. I'll come by this evening. Keep the doors locked until then. And Julissa, he paused, his tone shifting slightly gentler now. Don't let her see you're scared. That's exactly what she wants. But fear was already curling in her chest. By afternoon, the first storm hit. Julissa was at work, trying to bury herself in paperwork, when her phone buzzed again. Dozens of notifications. Social media tags. She hesitated before opening them, but when she did, her blood ran cold. Her face was everywhere. Diane had leaked private photos, not scandalous, but intimate ones. Julissa asleep on the couch with the children curled against her. Julissa in the hospital years ago after surgery. Julissa at a party during her 20s with a wine bottle in hand, laughing. Each photo had a venomous caption attached. unfit guardian, irresponsible drunk, mentally unstable. The posts were spreading fast, shared and commented on by strangers who didn't know her, didn't care about the truth. Julissa's vision blurred with tears. Her hands shook so violently she nearly dropped the phone. She fled to the bathroom, locking the door behind her, pressing her back against the wall as she gasped for breath. Her phone buzzed again. A message from Adrian this time. "I've seen it. Don't panic. This is what I warned you about. She's using public opinion as a weapon.
Stay strong.
I'll handle this." Julissa pressed the phone to her chest, trembling. How could anyone handle this? Diane wasn't just attacking her in court anymore. She was dismantling her life piece by piece, turning strangers into executioners. And then, as if the day hadn't cut deep enough, she received another call. Unknown number again. Her throat tightened as she answered. Julissa Vey? The voice was male.
Cold.
Detached. Yes. You don't know me, but I work with Diane. Consider this a courtesy call. If you love those children, if you want to keep them safe, you'll step aside. Walk away before it's too late.
Click.
The line went dead. Julissa dropped the phone, her hands trembling so violently she slid down the bathroom wall to the cold floor. It wasn't just Diane anymore.
Adrian had been right.
Someone else was backing her. Someone willing to threaten not just Julissa, but the children too. Her fear twisted into something sharper, rage. She wiped her tears and forced herself to stand. She looked at her reflection in the mirror, pale, shaken, vulnerable. Then she whispered to herself, steady and unyielding, "No more running. No more hiding. If Diane wants war, then I'll give her one she'll regret." But deep in her chest, the fear still pulsed, because for the first time, Julissa realized this wasn't just a family feud anymore. This was something darker, something bigger, and she had no idea how far it would go. By the time Adrian arrived that evening, Julissa's apartment felt like a fortress under siege. She had locked the doors twice, pulled the curtains shut, and checked on the children so many times that even little Maya had asked, "Auntie, are we in trouble?" Julissa had forced a smile and said no, but her trembling hands betrayed the truth. When Adrian stepped inside, carrying a laptop bag and a stack of files, Julissa's relief was so sharp it almost hurt. He looked composed, controlled as always, but there was a darkness in his eyes tonight, a shadow she hadn't noticed before. He placed his things on the table, his voice quiet but firm. "I've been digging, and I think I know who Diane's working with." Julissa froze. "Who?" Adrian opened his laptop, pulling up a series of documents and images. He turned the screen toward her. "This man," Adrian said, pointing to a photograph of a broad-shouldered figure in a tailored suit, his smile sharp and practiced for cameras. "Gareth Harlow, CEO of Harlow Industries." Julissa's stomach dropped. The name was familiar. Too familiar. "I know him. He was a client. Years ago. We worked on a project together. But why would he?" "Because you embarrassed him," Adrian cut in, his tone precise. "You exposed irregularities in one of his contracts and refused to sign off. It cost him millions. He's never forgotten it. Diane has given him the perfect excuse for revenge. And he has the resources to smear you publicly, legally, financially, socially." Julissa stared at the photo, her pulse thundering. Gareth's smug expression seemed to stare back at her, mocking, promising destruction. Adrian's voice lowered. "The harassment calls? The leaked photos? That's his style. Diane is just the face of this war. Harlow is the hand pulling the strings." Julissa pressed a trembling hand to her forehead. "This is insane. I'm just one person. Why are they doing this to me?" Adrian leaned closer, his eyes locked on hers. "Because you stood in their way. People like Harlow and Diane don't forgive. They don't forget. And they won't stop until you're broken." A chill swept through her, but beneath the fear, her anger simmered hotter. "Then we don't give them the chance. If Harlow wants war, we'll fight back." Adrian studied her for a moment, something flickering in his gaze. Admiration, maybe, or respect. That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say. He tapped his laptop, pulling up another document. I've already started tracing his moves. Financial leaks, political donations, media connections. The man has enemies, Julissa. We just need to find the right crack in his armor. But I'll be honest, this will get ugly. Once we strike, there's no going back. Julissa exhaled shakily, her resolve hardening. Then no going back. Before Adrian could respond, a sudden crash echoed from the balcony. Julissa gasped, spinning toward the sound. The children's startled voices came from the other room. Adrian was already moving, his hand reaching instinctively into his jacket, not for a weapon, but for his phone. He crept toward the sliding glass door, motioning for Julissa to stay back. When he flung the curtains open, the balcony was empty. Just a toppled flower pot lying in shards on the concrete. But something glinted in the faint streetlight, a small black device, wedged near the door. Adrian crouched, picking it up carefully. His jaw tightened. It was a listening device. Julissa's breath caught. They were here? Adrian's voice was low, grim. They're already inside your walls. Her knees buckled, and she grabbed the edge of the sofa to steady herself. The violation was worse than any rumor or message. Someone had been close enough to plant this, close enough to hear everything. Adrian slipped the device into an evidence bag from his case. His expression was no longer just professional. It was personal now, his eyes flashing with something fierce. They've declared war, he said, his tone like steel. Now it's our turn. Julissa swallowed hard, her fear and fury clashing like fire and ice inside her. The safety of the children, her own sanity, her entire future, everything was at stake. And as she looked at Adrian, standing there with the device in his hand and a storm in his eyes, she realized this was no longer just about surviving Diane's schemes. This was about exposing the darkness behind them, and it would take everything she had. The storm broke 2 nights later. Julissa had spent the day moving through shadows of fear, her every step echoing with the knowledge that Gareth Harlow's reach was deeper than she had ever imagined. Adrian had stayed close, his presence steady but restless, his phone buzzing constantly with contacts, lawyers, and investigators. Yet beneath his calm surface, Julissa sensed the pressure mounting, the kind that could shatter everything if one wrong move was made. By evening, the children were asleep, curled safely in their beds. Julissa and Adrian sat at the dining table, papers spread around them, the glow of Adrian's laptop casting sharp lines across his face. We'll file a counteraction tomorrow, Adrian said, his tone clipped, focused. I've gathered enough proof of Harlow's manipulations to make the media hesitate. Once we expose the financial inconsistencies, he'll... The knock at the door stopped him. Both froze. Julissa's pulse spiked. It was nearly midnight again. Adrian stood slowly, motioning for her to stay back. He approached the door, every step deliberate. When he opened it, 2 uniformed officers stood in the hallway. Julissa Vey, one asked. Julissa's stomach twisted. She stepped forward cautiously. Yes. The officer's expression was unreadable. We have a warrant. Her blood turned to ice. A warrant? For what? For child endangerment. The words hit harder than any blow. Julissa staggered back, her mouth opening, but no sound escaping. Adrian immediately stepped forward, his voice sharp, commanding. This is a mistake. Show me the warrant. The officer handed it over. Adrian scanned it, his jaw tightening, his eyes flashing with fury. This is fabricated. Absolute garbage. The officer didn't flinch. Ma'am, you'll need to come with us. Julissa's breath came in shallow gasps. No, this isn't real. I've done nothing wrong. My children. They're not your children, a voice cut in. Everyone turned. Diane stepped into the hallway, her smile sharp as glass. She was dressed immaculately, her heels clicking against the floor as she approached. Behind her stood Gareth Harlow, his imposing frame radiating quiet power, his smirk one of cold triumph. Julissa's heart stopped. Don't worry, Diane said smoothly, her voice dripping venom. They'll be safe with me. You see, Julissa, the world finally knows the truth. You're unstable. unfit, dangerous. And soon enough, even Adrian won't be able to protect you. Julissa's hands shook violently as the officers moved closer. Adrian stepped in front of her, his voice like steel. This is a setup. You have no legal grounds to take her. If you proceed with this, I'll... But Gareth interrupted with a low chuckle. You'll what? Fight us? You've already lost. The narrative is ours now. By tomorrow morning, every headline will scream about Julissa Vey's arrest. Reputation destroyed.
Custody gone.
Case closed. Julissa's knees buckled, and Adrian caught her arm, steadying her. She looked into his eyes, searching desperately for reassurance, for a promise that this nightmare could be undone. Adrian's jaw was set, his voice low but fierce as he whispered to her, "Don't break. This isn't the end. Trust me." The officers moved in, cold and unyielding. As the handcuffs clicked shut around Julissa's wrists, Diane's smile widened, her eyes gleaming with cruel satisfaction. Gareth stood beside her, silent, watching like a predator savoring its victory. Julissa lifted her head, refusing to give Diane the satisfaction of tears. Her voice, though trembling, carried through the silence. "You think you've won," she whispered. "But this isn't over. Not by a long shot." Diane's smirk faltered for just a fraction of a second, but Gareth's dark, amused gaze remained locked on Julissa's. As the officers led her away, Julissa felt the children's future slipping through her fingers. Fear threatened to consume her, but beneath it, burning like embers in her chest, was something far more dangerous: resolve. Because if this were war, she wasn't done fighting. Not yet. The cell was colder than Julissa imagined. Gray walls, a steel bench, the faint stench of disinfectant clinging to the air. The metal door shut behind her with a sound that echoed like finality. She sat on the bench, hands still trembling from the sting of the cuffs, her mind replaying Diane's smirk and Gareth Harlow's calculated silence. The humiliation, the helplessness, it was suffocating. Her phone, her freedom, her reputation, all stripped away in an instant. And worst of all, the children, her children. Were they safe? Or had Diane already swept them into her poisonous arms? Julissa buried her face in her hands, fighting back the sob that clawed at her throat. No tears. Not here.
Not in front of them.
She forced herself to breathe.
Slow.
Steady. She couldn't crumble, not when the children needed her more than ever. The metallic scrape of the door opening jolted her. A guard stepped aside, and Adrian came strode in. His suit was wrinkled, his tie loosened, but his presence filled the small cell with a force that steadied her. "Julissa," he said softly, kneeling beside her bench. His hand hovered for a moment before he finally placed it on hers, grounding her.
"I'm working on this."
"You won't stay here long." Her eyes burned. "They've won, Adrian. Diane and Gareth, they've already destroyed me. By tomorrow, the world will believe I'm a monster." Adrian's jaw clenched, his voice low and fierce.
"No."
"They think they've won, but they've overplayed their hand. I've seen it before. People drunk on power get sloppy. And Gareth Harlow just left us a trail." Julissa blinked, hope and doubt colliding. "What do you mean?" He pulled out a folder from his briefcase. Inside were printed screenshots of emails, financial statements, and confidential memos. Adrian tapped one page with his pen. "Harlow moved money last week. Large transfers, hidden through shell accounts. But one slipped. A wire linked directly to a lobbying firm notorious for media manipulation. And guess whose name was attached to the memo?" Julissa leaned closer, her breath catching. "Diane." "Exactly." Adrian's eyes glimmered with triumph, but only for a moment. His tone shifted back to caution. "If we prove this, not only do we clear your name, but we expose them both. Diane for conspiracy, Harlow for corruption. But we'll need to move fast before they bury the evidence." Julissa's chest tightened with a surge of determination. For the first time in days, she felt the faint stirrings of control. "Then let's move fast." Adrian studied her for a moment, his expression softening. "I need you to trust me, Julissa."
"Completely."
no matter how dark it gets. Her eyes met his. The exhaustion, the fear, it was all still there. But beneath it was something stronger. A bond forged in fire and betrayal, sharpened by the war they were fighting together. "I trust you," she whispered. For a moment, the walls of the cell disappeared. It was just them, bound not by handcuffs or fear, but by a growing connection neither had dared to acknowledge until now. Then the door slammed again, breaking the fragile moment. A guard barked that time was up. Adrian rose quickly, squeezing her hand before pulling away. "Hold on a little longer. I'll be back with news. And when I return," his voice dropped, promising, steady. "We'll turn the tide." The guard let him out, and the door locked shut once more. Julissa leaned back against the cold wall, her heart pounding, not just with fear anymore, but with something far more dangerous.
Hope.
Because for the first time since this nightmare began, she saw a crack in Diane's armor. And she intended to strike it until the entire facade crumbled. The hours in the cell stretched endlessly. Julissa traced the cracks in the concrete wall with her eyes, each line a reminder of how fragile her life had become. The ticking of time was unbearable. Every second felt stolen, from her freedom, from the children, from the life she had fought to build. When the door finally opened again, she looked up, expecting Adrian's steady presence. Instead, a different figure stepped in. Her heart dropped. It was Marcus Lane, her former colleague, the man she once trusted in her early career before their paths diverged. His suit was immaculate, his posture confident, but his eyes carried the glint of someone who had made a choice he couldn't undo. "Marcus." Julissa's voice cracked. "What are you doing here?" He gave her a tight smile, one that never reached his eyes. "I'm here on behalf of Harlow Industries." The words cut through her like ice. Julissa rose slowly, her back pressing against the wall. "You? With Harlow? After everything, after the project we exposed?" Marcus's smile faltered for a split second, but he recovered quickly. "I warned you back then, Julissa. I told you not to get in too deep, not to challenge men like him. But you never listened. You wanted to play the hero. And now look where it's gotten you." Her stomach twisted with betrayal. "So you sold me out." His eyes hardened. "I made a choice. Aligning with Harlow means survival.
Power. Security.
You chose the losing side." Julissa's hands clenched into fists. "You think betraying me is survival?"
No, Marcus.
"It's cowardice." The mask cracked for just a moment, his jaw tightening, but he quickly smoothed it over. "You'll see soon enough. Diane will have custody. Harlow will have his revenge. And you," his gaze swept over her, cold and final. "You'll be forgotten." Julissa stepped forward, her voice low but steady despite the rage boiling inside her. "You underestimate me. You always have. And that will be your downfall." For the first time, Marcus's confidence wavered. But before Julissa could say more, the guard entered, signaling his time was up. Marcus adjusted his cufflinks and gave her one last, hollow smile. "Goodbye, Julissa. For your sake, I hope you learn to accept defeat." He left, the echo of his footsteps lingering like poison in the air. Julissa sank back onto the bench, her chest tight, her thoughts spiraling. The betrayal burned sharper than Diane's cruelty or Harlow's schemes. Marcus had been a friend, someone she once trusted, and now he was another knife in her back. But beneath the sting of betrayal, her resolve hardened. If Marcus thought she would bow, he was wrong. His betrayal wasn't her end, it was fuel. When the door opened again and Adrian finally returned, Julissa rose with fire in her eyes. But before she could speak, Adrian's expression told her something was wrong. His usually calm demeanor was shaken, his eyes darker than she'd ever seen them. "What is it?" Julissa demanded, her voice breaking with urgency. Adrian hesitated, then spoke. "It's worse than we thought. Marcus isn't just working with Harlow, he's the one who handed over your private photos. He was inside your apartment weeks ago." The room spun around her. The flower pot. The listening device. The shadows she had felt pressing in. It wasn't just Diane. It wasn't just Harlow. It had been Marcus all along, feeding them pieces of her life, twisting it into ammunition. Julissa gripped the edge of the bench, her knuckles white. The betrayal was complete. But so was her rage. "This ends with me," she whispered, her voice trembling but fierce. "Not Diane. Not Harlow. Not Marcus. Me." Adrian's eyes met hers, a spark of admiration in the storm. "Then let's finish this." The chill of Marcus's betrayal lingered in Julissa's chest, but she refused to let it paralyze her. Every wound, every scar carved by Diane, Harlow, and now Marcus, was becoming a weapon. When Adrian leaned closer, lowering his voice, she caught the dangerous glint in his eyes. "They've underestimated you," he said. "We can use that. I've traced the financial channels Harlow and Marcus are using. Offshore accounts, shell corporations, it's all there. But there's something bigger." Julissa leaned in. "What is it?" Adrian slid a folder across the bench. Inside were printed documents, black and white, but damning. Her heart hammered as she scanned the pages. Payments, transfers, signed approvals, all linking back to Diane. Julissa's breath caught. She funded this. The stalking, the false accusations, even the custody suit. Adrian nodded grimly. "Diane's not just a pawn in Harlow's game. She's financing it. She's the linchpin." The realization slammed into her with the weight of betrayal compounded. Diane wasn't simply a spiteful relative clawing for control. She was orchestrating it, pulling strings with Harlow, tightening the noose. Julissa closed the folder, her jaw set. "Then we hit her where it hurts." Adrian's lips curved in a rare, dangerous smile. "Exactly." They devised a plan quickly, their voices low, precise, the cell walls echoing their whispered defiance. Adrian had already set a secure drop for the documents with a journalist, someone untouchable, someone who despised Harlow's empire as much as Julissa did. But the risk was enormous. If Diane caught wind of their move, she'd accelerate her strike, pushing for emergency custody before the truth could surface. Julissa pressed her palms against her knees, steadying her breath. "She's always believed I'm weak. Always believed I'll bend. But she's wrong. This time, I'm fighting back on my terms." Adrian placed a hand on hers, steady, grounding. "Then let's make her regret ever doubting you." That night, while Diane toasted her supposed victory at a glittering gala hosted by Harlow, Adrian's contact slipped the dossier into a reporter's hands. The first spark was lit. By morning, whispers began spreading through the city about Diane's mysterious financial dealings, about her secret ties to Harlow Industries. Julissa sat in her cell, a rare flicker of hope breaking through her exhaustion. But hope was dangerous, because with it came risk. And Diane, faced with exposure, would not hesitate to strike harder, faster, and crueler. Julissa braced herself. She had thrown the first punch. Now the real war was coming. The storm broke without warning. Julissa had barely begun to savor the flicker of hope when the warden's boots echoed down the corridor. The clang of her cell door opening felt like thunder. 2 guards stepped in. "You're being transferred," one barked. Her pulse quickened. "Transferred? Where?" Neither answered. They hauled her up, the iron grip of their hands bruising her arms. She caught Adrian's gaze from across the block, his eyes sharpened, filled with alarm, but powerless behind bars. The drive was silent, suffocating. By the time Julissa was dragged into the dimly lit hall of a private courthouse, realization seared through her. Diane had moved swiftly, ruthlessly, and there she was, Diane Hartwell, draped in a blood-red gown that shimmered under the fluorescent lights. Harlow lingered behind her like a shadow, smug and silent. Marcus was nowhere to be seen. "You've overplayed your hand, Julissa," Diane purred, her voice dripping with venom. "Did you really think a journalist could touch me? I've buried bigger scandals than this. You should have stayed quiet." Julissa's wrists ached against the cuffs, but her gaze was steady, unflinching. "Quiet is what you wanted."
Silent.
Erased. "But I'm still here, Diane. And the world is starting to hear me." Diane's smile faltered for a fraction of a second before hardening again. Not for long. By tomorrow, custody will be finalized. The children will be mine. And you. She leaned closer, her perfume cloying, her whisper like a dagger. Will rot in obscurity. The judge entered, papers in hand, the room tense with anticipation. But just as Diane prepared her performance, the courtroom doors burst open. A reporter stormed in, flanked by security, waving documents that mirrored the ones Julissa and Adrian had risked everything to release. Cameras followed, flashing relentlessly. Breaking news, the reporter declared. Evidence ties Diane Hartwell directly to illegal financial dealings with Harlow Industries, including fraudulent custody filings. Chaos erupted. Diane's composure cracked, her face blanching. Harlow cursed under his breath, tugging her arm, but the cameras had already captured her paling mask of guilt. Julissa inhaled, a trembling breath of vindication. For the first time in years, the balance shifted. The judge pounded the gavel. This court will not proceed until these allegations are reviewed. Ms. Hartwell, Mr. Harlow, you are both under investigation. Guards closed in on Diane, who thrashed and screamed, her elegant facade shattering into something raw and ugly. You'll regret this, Julissa. You hear me? You'll regret it. But her voice was drowned out by the shouts of reporters, the snapping of cameras, the clamor of justice catching up at last. Julissa stood, chains still biting into her wrists, but she felt lighter than she had in years. The children were safe, for now. The monster unmasked. When the guards led her back toward the van, Adrian caught her eye from the gallery where he'd been brought to testify. His lips curved, faint but certain. You did it. Her heart steadied.
Not done. Not yet.
But for the first time, the horizon looked breakable, like dawn creeping over a night too long endured. As the doors shut behind her, Julissa whispered into the darkness of the van. This isn't the end. This is the beginning. And somewhere inside, she felt the weight of every scar transform into armor.